Hello and welcome to episode 27 of Intruder Theatre in the Making podcast. I'm your host, Remi Rachuba, and thank you so much for tuning in. Now, today I've got a guest. It's a set designer, Basia Bińkowska, who has been helping me with Intruder. Basia, hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Remy. Hi, guys. Lovely to be taking part in this. I'm doing
Yes,
really well. I'm doing really well. Thank you.
and you are now in Poland.
Yes, I'm currently based in Poland. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So we saw each other a couple of weeks ago because you were working on a production, but we're going to come back to it a little bit later on in the podcast. But the first question I always ask is, do you remember how we met? I mean, we initially met by email. Do you remember anything about it?
I remember, Remy. I remember really well. First of all, I think it's really weird that we're talking in English because when we chat, we only communicate in Polish, so it's really weird to be like,
Yeah,
oh,
I know.
switching brains between
Yeah.
languages. I remember I received an email from you when I won an award in
Hmm.
2017 when I won Lindbury Prize, and I
Yeah.
remember you sent me an email with congrats and just being
Mm.
like really lovely and introducing yourself. So I remember that really well, but I don't remember when we first met in flesh, like face to face. I don't
Mhm.
remember first meeting when we met. I think it must have been like maybe 20, maybe when I did Ivan and the Dogs or something when you came to see my show. I'm
Or
trying.
didn't we meet at Kensington and Pratt over there?
Over
No?
there, or maybe at Young. I don't see. I
I
think it
think.
must have been like 2019. So
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
it was like 2 years ago when we met in a flash. I
Yeah,
think.
it
Yeah.
was 2 years ago. I remember yes, I saw info about your award when I got the Royal Conservative of Scotland newsletter, and I saw a Polish name and I thought, oh my God, Basia Bińkowska, who is it? And then I emailed you, and then you emailed me back, and then that was it. And then when I was looking for a set designer, I was just thinking, who could maybe help me with the show? And although we were in touch at that time, I never even thought of you. Not that I didn't want to, but I completely thought, didn't forgot. And then when Matt McGill, we were talking, he
Mhm.
said, "Oh, I know Basha." And I
Yeah,
thought, "Oh, yes. Oh my God, of course." So
yeah,
then I emailed again. Yeah, yeah. So
yeah,
that's how it was. And then we met
yeah.
in London.
In
And
London.
then, yeah. And then, so that was the first time we met. And then I always come back and I always ask people because I'm genuinely interested. How did you get involved in the arts? What was your journey like? How did you know you wanted to be a set designer? Where did it start for you?
Yeah. I think it's a mixture of things actually, because when I was a kid, I went to a music school.
Mhm.
When I was little, all of my siblings went to a music school, so I went as well. And I remember realizing that maybe I don't want to be a musician, but I somehow want to be connected to the arts.
Mhm.
I was, I guess, exploring it, and I was never a person as a really young child. I wasn't really a person. You know how you hear stories that people draw a lot or like create things.
Yeah.
It started for me quite later on actually because I was playing the piano. I was kind of more focusing into in on the instrument rather than creating things with my hands.
Ah.
So when I started to be interested in arts and fine arts, I was like, oh, this could be quite, this could be quite fun. So I was maybe about 13, so quite late,
Mhm.
quite late, I guess. And around 12 and 13, I started to be like really into it. And a lot of things, I used to make a lot of collages. So I would cut out
Mm.
a lot of things from different fabrics, materials, newspapers, and I
Mm-hmm.
would create collages of people, of
Mm-hmm.
shapes. I was
Mm-hmm.
really into that, and then when I already knew that I'm not going to continue my music career, and I didn't want to go to music school, like the next level, I guess. So I did
Mm-hmm.
my 6 years, and then I don't think I want to do another
Yeah.
6 years. So I sort of decided, oh, maybe it's a time to explore if I could do something still connected to the arts, but more in fine arts sector.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking for schools, and I found this school. So in Poland we have a profile high school, so you can
Mm-hmm.
go to like a fine arts high school, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when I was 16, I started studying in a high school like this. I got in because obviously there were like exams before, and I was preparing for a year,
Mm-hmm.
just sort of getting really like basic sort of skills and maybe basic knowledge about what it's going to be like. And I got in,
Mm-hmm.
and from there, and I spent 4 years there. So it was essentially a high school, and then I had
Yeah.
extra classes connected to all sorts of arts, because we did sculpture, painting, drawing, all graphic design,
Wow.
different types. Also, we
Yeah.
did sort of analog graphic design, like pretty much every single
Mm-hmm.
department of arts. Um, and while I was there, I already sort of realized that a lot of that stuff is very, being an artist feels quite very individualist. So we were
Mm-hmm.
trained to be like individual in what we do
Yeah.
rather than a group of artists. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? That
Yeah. Yeah.
the system of education was kind of
Mm-hmm.
imposing that you need to be an individual rather than working in a group, which I've realized wasn't really my thing, because I was enjoying creating with people rather than by myself.
Yeah.
So I was also at the time, because that high school was in a city called Bydgoszcz, which is like 2 hour train from my family home. So I also
Yeah.
moved to the city,
Yeah.
and I used to go to a theater a lot in there, and realize, oh, this is interesting. Theater is something, wow, completely
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And I remember seeing some crazy stuff in that theater in Bydgoszcz, and being like, oh
Yeah.
wow, it's sort of designed for theater. Design for theater kind of means that you can mix all types of different art forms.
Yeah. Different media.
Um,
Yeah.
so it was really interesting for me. And then when you see it, and you see, group of actors in that design, and it felt so
Yeah.
collaborative for me, and I was an
Mm-hmm.
audience member and I was watching it. So I quickly realized that potentially theater is a place where you can sort of have, it's a group of artists, a commune,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to call it,
Yeah.
that creates something together rather than being an individual,
Yeah.
lonely
Mm-hmm.
lonely and left in your studio person. And I'm sure this is for some people that works really well, but
Yeah.
I already knew that maybe that's not what I want to do.
Yeah. And then at what point you decided, how did that idea come about you going to the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland?
um I also I have another good story, actually, because I just remembered
Yeah.
the first time I heard a word scenographer, which is in
Yeah.
Polish and in other
Yeah.
sort of European languages means set
Yeah.
designer. And it's a funny story, because I was watching I was watching TV, and I was like 12, 11
Yeah.
maybe. And I was watching television, and there was an advert, a car, and a person, a celebrity who was essentially advertising this car was Alan
Mm-hmm.
Starsky, a very
Mm-hmm.
famous, very famous film art
Yeah.
director, production designer. And I remember seeing that sort of, he was standing in that commercial and being like, yeah, I recommend this car. My name is Alan Starsky and I'm a scenographer. And I remember hearing that and I was like, that's just that word, scenographer, just sounded so fascinating. And it and I remember being like, I want to be that. I don't know what that means yet, but I want to be that person. It just sounded so amazing. So it was still before I decided kind of to go
Yeah.
to a high school of fine arts, but that word like stuck with me for some reason. And like
What was the word?
scenograph,
Scenographer.
scenograph,
Scenographer. Okay.
scenographer. So that word was like,
Yeah.
that's such a cool word. I really want to be that. I don't know what that means, but it's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
And also the car commercial and everything around it is just a bit
Yeah.
bizarre. So when I was in high school, I was like,
Mm.
realized also that in theater, you know, it's a group of people and I wanted to study scenography.
Yeah.
So what my first year in there, I already, you know, a lot of people were like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to study. Is it going to be painting? Is it going to be graphic
Mm.
design? Is it going to be sculpture? But I already knew I'm going to study scenography. Like I already knew that's what
Yeah.
it would be for me. And then when it got to my final year, I was considering studying in Poland. Of course, I was.
Yeah.
But in the reason why I didn't was that in Poland you study scenography in Academy of Fine Arts rather than in a school of drama. So the studies are very, to me, are very sort of conceptual, which is amazing. But a lot of that time that I would spend there, and it would be 5 years that I would have to do, would be also repeating what I've already done in that high school.
Yeah.
So I didn't necessarily want to continue, you know, painting still lifes and doing all
Yeah.
and getting all the skills that I've already had.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted more practical studies that will allow me to understand theater design from a technical point of view. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then I started searching for courses outside of Poland, obviously, but you know, knowing that English was kind of my, at the time, you know, English was my, you could call a second language. I didn't know any other language on the level that I would feel comfortable enough to study in it.
Yeah.
So I was looking for schools, and also it was quite late in the day because it was around March.
Yeah.
And a lot of schools in the UK, you apply much earlier on.
Yeah.
So I decided, it's quite late. What do I do? And I found the school in Glasgow, Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, and the applications were, you know, it was still open. Maybe it was around February, but it was still not late. I mean, maybe I was
Yeah.
late when I sent it like a week later or something. And I sent the application, I sent my portfolio and everything I had to prepare.
Yeah.
And then I had an interview, and that's how I got in. And that was still before I was sort of doing my exams in my high school. So
Wow.
I
Yeah.
I essentially got a conditional offer. So I still had to pass
Yeah.
other exams back in Poland to
Yeah.
be accepted in. So yeah, that's how that happened.
And then how did you find studying in Scotland?
I mean, first of all, it was you know, moving to another country is always kind of a big, you know, a big thing.
Yeah.
Although I've spent some time in the UK during the summers. So I you know, I knew the culture a little
Yeah.
bit, but it was still quite, you know, it was still a big thing for me. And felt, you know, the first year, I don't know, in terms of studying, I was pretty, you know, I was pretty happy with what I was doing, but
Yeah.
it felt, you know, it felt quite lonely in
Yeah.
the first year. So I was very, I think, and I can say that And I think I can say that because I'm when I was studying, I was very focused on the studies. I wasn't
Yeah.
really doing a lot of the stuff outside.
Yeah.
I would sort of do a bit, obviously I've done some traveling and sightseeing, but I was very like, I need to make the most of this
Yeah.
course. So I was always very disciplined about that because, moving out, and I was like, oh, I felt really lucky to be studying in that
Yeah.
school. So I just wanted to make sure that I make the most of the time.
Yeah.
So a lot of that time in Glasgow, as I sort of look back at it, I I made friends and stuff, but it was always like just make the most of that time you
Yeah.
have.
And how many were you on, in your year? How many people were there?
So in that school, it's Bachelor of Arts, and the department is called Production Arts and Design.
Yeah.
So there were 15 of us there,
Mm.
and out of 15 there was 4 designers.
Right. Okay.
And then 4 designers, 4 scenic artists, 2 costume makers, 2 construction builders, and
Mm-hmm.
3 prop makers, because it was kind of divided
Yeah.
into other departments as well.
And then, do I remember well that when you were in Scotland, you also went to America? You studied there?
Yes, yeah. So I in my second year I applied for an exchange to go
Mm-hmm.
so I went for like one semester, like sort of for one, how do you call it? Oh,
One term?
one term. Yes, one term. So I went from September till December.
Mm-hmm.
I was studying in California, in CalArts, California Institute
Mm-hmm.
of the Arts, and that was also an incredible experience, because
Yeah.
it was also a very different system of education and sort of
Yeah.
studying set design. So it was just amazing to experience different ways
Mm.
of learning and I guess exploring and progressing.
Yeah. So it was kind of very interesting journey, Poland, Scotland, America, and then you came back to Scotland. But also in Scotland, you won that award. Like, was it in your final year, right?
Yeah, so when no, so the award was in London.
Right.
So the journey was kind of, so had my final year in Scotland,
Mm-hmm.
I already done my sort of final show,
All
and
right.
I was realizing, oh, I'm graduating. What am I doing? Am I staying in Scotland? Am I
Yeah.
going back to Poland? Where do I work? I did,
Yeah.
work in
Yeah.
our industry. Getting work in our industry is extremely hard, especially for young people just out of college. So what I've done is, it was around February again,
Yeah.
and I applied for this traineeship at the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Mm-hmm.
That I was and I got that job. So that meant that just after I graduated, I was assisting designers at Royal Shakespeare Company for a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that. So it's just, it was incredible because I just graduated and I already had the job, and
Yeah.
and I learned, and then in a year there, I assisted on about 8 or even 9 shows, and I assisted some
Yeah.
incredible designers. I mean, just to name a few: Tom Piper, Max Jones, Lily Arnold, Greta Gericke, Ty Green.
Mm.
It was just such an experience, because I think with theater design is really hard to,
Yeah.
I don't think, whatever, you can study it, but like actually getting the real experience by
Yeah.
assisting, that's like, I think in that year I've learned potentially,
Mm-hmm.
more than because it's just
Yeah.
practice, it's just experience that is making you get the knowledge from, and you get the
Mm-hmm.
experience from. So
Yeah. And it's very interesting because this is the next thing I wanted to ask. ask, so you've been working with these amazing people and also for amazing theaters like Lyric Hammersmith and the Young Vic, and quite recently at the Donmar, which we're going to come back in a couple of minutes. But one of the things I really wanted to talk about was, we were rehearsing Intruder literally the first week of rehearsals, then the pandemic hit, and this is it.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything went tits up, to be quite honest. And then you went back to Poland, and
Yeah.
then you did some work at Teatr Stary in Krakow, Old
Yeah.
Theatre in Krakow. So this is something I really wanted to ask because I'm really interested in it, because you've been working here for such a long time, and then you went back to Poland and you worked in the Polish system.
Mhm.
How do you compare these two systems, like theater system? What was it like working over there? What is it like working here? And then we will move on to the Donmar production. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, oh, it's a difficult question, Remy, because I've been sort of comparing the two systems for the past year, I guess, and it's hard to sort of
Wow.
say. I don't know. They're very different systems, very different.
Mm,
And I'm not sure I can sort of say. I think there are good and bad things in both of them, and potentially, if you
right.
take the good from both of them,
Yeah.
we have this perfect system for all of
Yeah.
us, for audience and for theater makers and workers. Um, so it's just quite interesting that I was lucky enough this year to kind of get to compare it and see what it's like. I think
Mm-hmm.
first of all I would say that, so I was working at the National Theatre. So
Mm-hmm.
that started in Krakow is like, it's potentially the equivalent of maybe National Theatre in London
Yeah.
in terms of its sort of scale and importance maybe.
Yeah.
and and I think the first thing is um just the way the shows are programmed and the
Mm-hmm.
time that the artists are given to essentially create something. And also I think the big difference is that in here, I in Poland, in Krakow, I've never felt like I'm creating this final product
Yeah.
that's gonna be, that's the audience is gonna see. Every one of us in the room, including the artistic director, were like, this is an experiment. We're doing this show, and the show was about this essentially time of Reformation times in Poland. So
Yeah.
1600s in Poland, and about the community of Arians who were sort of something like Calvins or Lutherans, if you
Mm-hmm.
in other countries of Europe. So it was this very, it was an experiment of what would happen if this community, this religious community of Protestant church would suddenly arrive in 2020 Krakow from,
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
essentially historical figures from 500 years ago
Yeah.
arrive in Poland now in 2020. So this whole concept was quite an experiment, and it was written. The play was written by the director as well, by Benjamin Bukowski, I just found this, how he's written it and how he's created that concept was extremely fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
But that difference is, I guess, that it was always, we were still swapping scenes, swapping roles. We were just
Mm-hmm.
about to open, and the actors were like, oh, which scene is after which, because we were experimenting with that
Right.
so much. And it was never meant to be this final piece of product that is going to be, does that make sense? It was never this
Mm-hmm.
type of work.
Yeah.
And the other difference is that my design deadline, so we had 2 months of rehearsals for this show,
Yeah.
and my design deadline was a month before opening it,
Yeah.
which means that I could be in rehearsals and develop it with everyone in the room for a month and then
Yeah.
deliver a design.
Ah.
which is very quite, what's the word? It really just allows you to have a bit, it's just quite freeing. You have quite a lot of freedom, and it also
Yeah.
means that collaboration between you, the actors, the director, the dramaturg,
Yeah.
is sort of very open. So, and this is what I really enjoy in being a theater designer, is that, I'm creating a space and a world, but I want everyone who's creating that piece to
Yeah.
also be part of that conversation.
So the other question I wanted to ask, is it also that, here in the UK, you have like 4 weeks to put on a production? Is it the same in Poland that they put on a production in 4 weeks and that's it?
So yeah, just like I said, Remi, so in Poland we were rehearsing for 2 months, so 8 weeks,
Mm.
in which I've designed 4 weeks before the opening night, and then we
Yeah.
were putting a show as in the tech and dress rehearsal. We had about maybe 2 weeks in the theater space, but I think this
Right.
varies. And in the UK, how that system works is, I essentially, when I'm hired, I get given design deadlines.
Yeah.
And just recently, for example, my final design was like 2 months before we started rehearsals.
Yeah.
So, I prepare this thing and I decide on a lot of sort of decisions regarding the space, the architecture,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of the visual dramaturgy much before, much earlier
Right.
than it happened here. And then, I sort of present that on the first day of rehearsals, and then
Yeah.
everyone is kind of, we have 4 weeks of rehearsals and we're working around what I've already created.
Right. Any other differences you've noticed?
uh Differences, I think it's just the culture is very different, and potentially maybe because the quantity, in Poland there is not as many shows as obviously we have in the UK.
Yeah.
So it just feels slightly less sort of pressured. And also, actors being in the rep system also means, they know each other very well,
Yeah.
which can be helpful, can be not helpful. um, so I think, and also, in terms of the budget, and it's just, I wasn't quite as restricted as I sometimes feel that I am in the UK, in terms
Right.
of the limits of the budget, of the fee.
Mm.
um, but again, I think in the UK, what is amazing is that sort of there is a bit more organization, because I think in Poland, essentially every single worker in a theater works, to work, like they want to make sure that the artist, so the
Yeah.
visiting artist being the director and the designers,
Yeah.
are happy. And but you need to connect, you need to communicate yourself. So for example, there are
Yeah.
no production meetings. You need to make
Right.
sure the communication comes from you. There is no sort of organization of teams as it is in
Yeah.
the UK, which I was missing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I think it's sort of, I think if you take the good things from the UK system and the good things from the Polish system, you could really have this dream kind of a dream
Yeah.
dream place to be working at. It's, I think, yeah.
And also, one of the things I remember when we were working on Intruder, you kind of, if I remember correctly, you like to work when rehearsals are taking place. Is that correct? That you like to be in rehearsals and seeing, oh, this is what's happening. Maybe this would be good here and this would be good there, right?
Yeah, it's really important for me to be in the rehearsal room, definitely. And especially when other creatives are in the room as well. And
Mm.
I'm creating costumes, with actors. And if, there are decisions to be made, like, if it's a much more device process, it's joy to be in the rehearsal room. I
Yeah.
had some designs and some productions where the design was very disciplined, and I also like that type of work when it's kind of when the design essentially
Yeah.
has solved all the visual dramaturgy and pretty much the whole dramaturgy of how it's going to be staged.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes it's much simpler for me when it's a sort of I don't have any props. And for example, the show I did at Youngvik, Ivan and the Dogs, was this sound installation.
Yeah.
And in a way, what I've done and how I've curated that installation was, that was very disciplined design. I didn't have to potentially be in the room as much as I need to be when the show is much more devised. So I think it
Yeah.
depends on the process and how the director is approaching the piece. For
Mm-hmm.
me, the director is sort of the person. No, I don't want to say the most, it's like a partner. It's like we're
Yeah.
parents of this piece.
Yeah.
So it really depends on that partner who is the
Yeah.
director and
Yeah.
how that relationship and how my
Yeah.
process is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So moving back and to Donma, an interesting thing when I was preparing the questions, I was thinking maybe you could tell us what you've noticed. Because you've been working here for such a long time in the UK, and you worked pre-pandemic, and now you just worked on a production at the Donmar, Love and Other Acts of Violence. That was the title. And did you notice any differences now when you came back to the theatre after a year and a half? The way people work now, how was it different than it was, that when, we were working together or you were working on other productions?
Yeah, so in terms of because I guess the first difference for me is because I did decide to spend sort of be in Poland most of the pandemic and be based
Yeah.
in here. And um what it meant is I've developed quite like my say my digital skills.
Yeah.
So nowadays, for example, I design everything on sort of 3D software, which I'm
Hmm.
able to share on a screen with a director, production manager. So actually, it wasn't, in a way,
Yeah.
I felt like me and the director in Lace, who's directed Love and Other Acts of Violence, we felt like actually we now have even more meetings than we would have in the pre-pandemic times, because in
Hmm.
online I don't have to travel with the model box everywhere. I can just meet
Yeah.
with her even for like half an hour,
Yeah.
just to show her something. And
Yeah.
it meant that we actually had a lot of meetings to develop that design, and it was designed via Zoom.
Yeah.
And then I've developed the physical model, which I've sent to London.
Yeah.
But in a way, the design process now is somehow simpler, because I have those skills now that I can
Yeah.
technically work on the piece on my laptop. I don't have to carry the model box from
Yeah.
one meeting to another,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. So it actually means that it's much better for me, and it's much more sustainable, because a lot of materials, I don't have to
Hmm.
build all the different types of
Yeah.
models and stuff. So that's definitely a plus for me. In terms of the process, I have sort of decided that I would, obviously, I really want to still work in the UK, but it kind of means that I design it potentially over here, and
Yeah.
then I come for the rehearsal process and to put the production on. And I think that's definitely possible, and I'm hoping that's going to be the system I'm going to be using for the next
Hmm.
year or so.
Yeah.
Um, so in a way, I'm sort of based in here, but I come in
Yeah.
and out, and spend. So I've just got back from London, and I've been there for 7 weeks putting that
Yeah.
production on.
Yeah.
Well, almost 7. So so I think it's definitely possible, and a lot of designers do that. When designers do operas, they go from one big city to another
Hmm.
big city, from country to country, from a continent to
Yeah.
another. So I think it's definitely possible, but I think I've just realized, because of the pandemic, that it's also possible for me to be
Hmm.
based in here, but still create
Hmm.
and put on shows in London or
So
in
that
Europe.
doesn't mean that you need to be in London. You can be somewhere else and be working on other
Exactly,
projects.
exactly. As soon as I arrive for that rehearsal and the process of
Yeah.
putting it on, I think that's totally doable. But
Hmm.
I don't think it's gonna be as it used to be for me when I was doing 8 shows a year, just from one to the other, and different scales, because just before pandemic I was still doing from a scale of of a theater 503 to a lyric Hammersmith big stage, so it was still sort of juggling
Hmm.
between different scales and different budgets. And I
Yeah.
think currently I cannot really do that anymore, because if I come in, it has to be
Yeah.
it has to be a sort of a good size show.
Yeah.
So so the travel is kind of all. I mean, all theater is worth it, but because of the time and
Yeah.
my travel, that during the pandemic is still not as easy as it used to be before,
Yeah.
as we know it.
So you've had quite a creative pandemic. Like you've been busy doing things.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm looking at back at it. I think I've definitely spent this time productively.
Hmm.
And yeah, I've also started studying architect. So I'm currently doing my master's in architecture and interior architecture.
Yeah.
So I've started that a year ago, so I'm still kind of, this is my final year, just started now.
Yeah.
So which is also something that I always, again, it's getting the skills that I need for the set designer, for
Yeah.
the job that I'm already doing, but it's also
Hmm.
opening up more opportunities for me to do other work and other projects in other fields.
Hmm. And what's coming up for you next? Are there any things that you are definitely working on? Is it in Poland or in here? What's in the pipeline?
Yeah, so I'm definitely doing a show in Poland just in the spring.
Hmm.
And it's a dance piece, a modern dance piece, and we haven't put the sort of the calendar and the schedule of it yet, but I think it's going to travel, and it's going to be on tour, essentially, to
Yeah.
different cities. So this is definitely happening, and I have some other potential projects
Hmm.
also in here. And I'm also getting sort of checked and I'm also getting checked for shows in London, but I'm still kind of,
Hmm.
I only just got back, and I'm kind of looking at my calendar and seeing
Hmm.
um what's possible, and I'm also sort of having a bit of a rest.
Hmm.
Just the sort of the last few months have been quite sort of intense, so I'm enjoying a bit of time off, as you
Hmm.
can have when renovating a kitchen, because I'm also doing that just now. So,
That's
so
another project.
that's another
That-
project.
That's another project, renovating the kitchen. And then one thing just popped in my head now before I asked the last question. When you work on a project, where do you start? Like, you read the script and then you meet with the director, what they want to see, or you have your own idea about something.
So when do I start? So it depends, I guess, because it
Mm,
really, all shows have been very different in terms of sort of times sort of time and schedule.
Yeah.
So for example, the show I just did at the Donmar, I already started on it in like early May, so it's been kind of
Right.
June, July, August,
Yeah.
and then started rehearsing, so it's been sort of 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
With the show I've done in Poland, I already knew that I'm doing it 6 months before we opened, 6 months before we started rehearsals.
Mm-hmm.
So I already, and that show actually needed from me a lot of history lessons, like reading a lot of historical books and stuff. So
Right.
I got involved in it, and I did a lot of research.
Yeah.
So, and then I actually started designing that like 2 months before,
Yeah.
working on it to some level, because I was
Mm-hmm.
designing it in the rehearsal room like a month, like 2 months, maybe a month before. I did an opera once with an opera director, and we had it in August. I started designing it in December the year before.
Oh,
It's
wow.
kind of, I think it kind of, and it kind of depends on a scale. Some designers, when you do big operas, you design
Yeah.
it 2 years, 3 years before. There's just
Yeah. Yeah.
different scales. Different scales of projects. But I tend to, I like to have quite a lot of time, and also my process is quite, I think it's still quite long. I think when I did 8 shows a year in London, I used to be really
Wow.
quick, but now when I do, this year I do 2 shows, and I was really like into, I took
Yeah.
a long time to make it, to make the
Yeah.
most of the time and to all make it perfect.
Yeah.
So
So
I
you
think
took your time rather than just rushed about, okay, there was another show.
exactly.
Okay. Okay.
But also this year was still kind of, still a lot of designers and theaters are coming back, so it's only been
Mm-hmm.
a few months of
Yeah.
its back to its potentially, well, it's not
Yeah.
really back to what it's been before pandemic, but it's kind of, I see a lot of designers being, fully back to the mode that they
Mm-hmm.
used to be at.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure if I will be back in the mode I was
Yeah.
I was before, just kind of from one theater to another, from one technique to another. I just remember, I pretty much, in the year before the pandemic, I had like a month where I opened 2 shows,
Yeah.
and it's just, I just remember being so extremely tired and so extremely
I remember when we were meeting that you always needed to run to the
somewhere,
somewhere,
always,
always.
and and it's a roller coaster, and a lot of all of the designers in London would say that it is, but I realized that maybe that's not really sustainable and healthy for me.
Well, you know what? A very last question that I ask everyone.
Hmm.
So Ed and Marcus and Mark, what are the tips you would give to anyone who wants to be a set designer? Where could they start? Yeah.
Yeah, um I think the most important one is see as much theater and read as much about it as you can.
Hmm.
um at the beginning, obviously, if you do, if you do want to study it, just examine the school you want to study it, because there's so many
Hmm.
schools in UK that, that you can do it. So I would definitely do my research into
Hmm.
what type of school is going to be suitable for
Yeah.
you, because they're all very, very different. I think some of them are much more based on the skills, on the technical
Hmm.
skills, like model making skills, but some of them are much more based on the sort of the concept, and the sort of the realizing the idea, the
Hmm.
idea is more important. So I think, I mean, for me, it's always the idea is the most important thing, that that your design, what the idea is
Hmm.
behind it. So, but the skills are also extremely important. So I
Yeah.
think you need to find the right balance. because it's a, theater designing is a mixture, is sort of a bit of architecture, is a bit of, it's a bit of painting, it's a bit of, you need to know a lot about period. It's just such a mixture of skills and knowledge that you need to have, that studying it, reading, watching sort of theater, reading books about it is definitely at the beginning really important.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you are already, if you are deciding you want to do it and you want to study it, I think studying is important, but I like I said, I've learned potentially much more about this job when I was assisting
Mm-hmm.
than when I was assisting for a year than when I was studying for 3 years.
Yeah.
So definitely getting a hands-on experience on assisting
Mm-hmm.
is super, super helpful. But yeah, I think it's really important to, stay true to yourself, that you are an artist, and it's your, if, because it's a mission for me. It's always been like a journey and a mission that I have, and I cherish that, and I definitely,
Mm-hmm.
I want to do this job, in
Yeah.
50 years, 60 years time. um so I think it's also really important that you have that time to progress, and it's a learning curve all your life, I think, in this job. So I think it's really important to kind of take care of yourself, staying
Mm-hmm.
healthy. And I know it's
Yeah.
really difficult in this industry because we have to do so many shows, we have to get potentially jobs outside of the industry
Yeah.
to make a living in London. I think it's a choice because I kind of, I realize that's not really the lifestyle I want to have potentially. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm sort of stepping back from that roller coaster that I
Mm-hmm.
had. But yeah, it's really hard, and also mentally, it can be draining.
Yeah.
Um, but it is a really, it's a beautiful job, and even though I have moments of total love and hate relationship with that job, I still want to do that job. So it's,
Yeah.
um so yeah, it's, you need to balance it yourself, your personality, and how your personality fits in it, and how you
Yeah.
communicate with people, how you lead people to your ideas, to your choices, how you lead a team. It's also very important. So it's a sort of a mixture of things that you need in
Mm-hmm.
that job. um but yeah, I think my advice would be, um do it, but just
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you also take care of yourself and your time, and
Yeah.
and
And then
kind of,
people can read all about your work on your website, basiabinkowska.com, and also on your social media handles, Basia Bińkowska, and I will put it in the podcast description so that people can have an easier access to it. So this is it. I mean, I could talk for ages about your process. Thank you so very, very much for spending, I don't know, has it been 40, 50 minutes talking to me about your artistic journey and how you work. Thank you so much, Basha.
thank you so much, Remy. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. I'm so glad you invited me to do this.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to the listeners who maybe found out more about how you work and how the whole process, how it all works when you design the show. And hopefully we can work together on Intruder next year. I
Yeah,
don't know when it's going to be. We're still planning it, but I hope it's going to be in 2022 at some point. So that'll be it for episode 27. Stay well, stay safe, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye for now.